podcast hosting on Libsyn with code Podfest Global. So go over to Libsyn.com and take advantage of that promo code for a free month of podcast hosting at Libsyn. Also want to thank the folks at BSW. We've gotten our microphones and we've gotten a lot of our equipment from the folks at BSW. Find your true voice with Heil, and check out the folks over at BSW. We have a set up in our live stream studio that we got from the fine folks at BSW. And Polymash, Hoover, Sleep Easy. We've got some great sponsors, the OSSA Podcast Network and StreamYard. And we just have a phenomenal group of sponsors, and just want to scroll down these before we bring on our next guest so that you can see all the folks that have made this event possible. And I will take myself off of screen share right now, and I want to introduce our final host slash speaker slash presenter slash overall amazing gentleman. He is Nick Rodriguez. He's the host of the Nick Rodriguez Show. And I'm glad that you were able to find a show that had your name in it so that it all kind of worked out. It would have been bad if they had like a Bill Jennings or something hosting the Nick Rodriguez podcast. So I'm glad we got that worked out. And Nick has been a phenomenal friend to Sports PodCon. He spoke at the event in March in Orlando, Florida. He is a overall great guy, great host, a young guy, as you can tell. And he is really making a name for himself in the podcasting space in the world of sports. So with that, Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you again so much for coming on Sports PodCon tonight. I really am excited to have you here.
Well, thank you, John. And before I get started, I just want to say thank you to you and Chris for allowing me to speak. It was such a blast to speak just a few months ago. It's kind of crazy how different things are. You know, I'm just as equally as excited to speak as I did in March as I am right now. But I'll go ahead and get started. And thanks again for having me, guys.
Thank you. Take it away. I think you can grab the screen share to put up your, there you go.
Perfect.
Awesome.
All right. And as John mentioned, today I'm going to be talking about how to secure athletes and sports personalities for your podcast. I just want to give a little background on how I got started and how I'm doing another presentation here today at Sports PodCon. And I am really grateful to be in these shoes once again. So again, my name is Nick Rodriguez. I'm the host and producer of the Nick Rodriguez podcast. When I first started thinking about podcasting, it was probably about a year ago. It's probably about in August or September when I first started thinking about doing a podcast. And we officially launched in November of 2019 with our first episode with Connorrogers, who is a host of Bleacher Report's Stick to Football. So it took a lot of deliberation and research to try to figure out, you know, what kind of podcast I actually wanted to do. And as John, you know, jokingly mentioned at the top, it's lucky that I have the Nick Rodriguez podcast. And I knew a couple of things when I got into podcasting that I wanted to have my name. I wanted to be something that I could represent behind my name and brand. And the other thing is I knew I wanted to be in sports, but I didn't know where exactly in sports that I wanted to go. So after doing some research and deliberation, I figured out that I wanted to influence young listeners and really target guests who are excelling in the sports industry. That was extremely important to me. And John was the guest on the show. And, you know, I think once you have your show details and what you kind of want to have on the show, it makes it a lot easier to find guests for this show. And it's been such a fun process to book guests and everything like that. But as you can see, the last bullet point that I have here is goal. It's simple. Tell people stories and to influence young listeners. You know, I'm young, as John alluded to. I'm 25 years old, and for me, I'm still wanting to learn more and figure out what I could do best in this world. You know, my degree is in communication, so I'm still trying to figure it out. So I can sympathize with someone who's a high schooler or a college student who is still trying to figure it out. And that's really the purpose behind the Nick Rodriguez podcast, is to deliver those interviews and incredible stories by some of the people that we've had on the show to say, okay, this person struggled from here and now they're here. They're having this incredible story and this incredible journey. And, we've had some really strong feedback over the last few months, and people really enjoying the show. And I think one thing that people really like about it is, even if you don't like sports, and I know this is Sports PodCon where, most people here probably like sports, but it's not just about sports. It's about the human relationships and the journeys that these people are taking on. So it's something that people are really, have really liked, and it's been really exciting so far. So we've been really thankful and blessed to have some great sports icons to be on the show, such as, Charleswoodson, who played in the NFL for a number of years, connorrogers, who I mentioned at the top of the show, as well as Dr. Jenwelter. Dr. Jenwelter was the first female to actually coach the NFL, and I'll kind of get into how we land some of those guests. The first thing that I think is important is selecting the right guest. Now, what I mean by this is knowing what kind of guest that you want. This goes back to when I was talking about the creation of the show. I knew I wanted a sports show, but I had to really figure out what I wanted. What kind of impact was I really looking to have? And when it came down to it, it is a show that influences young people, usually people that are in sports industry positions or former athletes or media members that can help you. And now once you know what your story is about, then it becomes a lot easier to decide what kind of guest that you want. Here you can see this is a picture of myself with former Georgia Tech quarterback Taquan Marshall. Taquan was an excellent guest, and really it was easy to decide for him to be on the show because he was an elite athlete. He's doing great things in the community, and it was just a no-brainer at that point. But I think the first thing it's often overlooked is finding that right guest. What is the criteria? What are the parameters that I want? And I think oftentimes when you create a show, you just want to jump in and start creating content immediately. But I think taking a step back, understanding what your story is, who are you targeting, and what kind of guest that you want to have. Because once you know the typical guest, the right guest that you want to have on, it becomes a lot easier to book guests. And the second thing I have here, don't be afraid to say no, it's your brand. I'm going to say that again. Don't be afraid to say no, it's your brand. After you do a few episodes and you start to pick up traction of people seeing your show, you're going to have friends, family, maybe people that you don't know that you've kind of crossed paths with, reach out to you, via social media or anything like that to say, hey, I would love to be a guest on your show. And that's so, it's such an honor to have people reach out to you and say, hey, I would love to be a guest and, talk about, Alabama football or, COVID-19 and the impact of sports. But what can be difficult sometimes is saying no and saying, you know what, even though I am high school friends with this person or they are a good person and they do speak well, unfortunately, they don't exactly fit the criteria of the type of guest that I'm actually looking for. And you have to say, you know what, unfortunately, I am going to, look and move into a different direction. But, I think there's a lot of positives to take from that. Obviously, the person that is wanting to be a guest in your show, they took the step to reach out to you, is listening to your show, and they love the content you're producing. So don't hang your head low, hang your head high, hang your head high, and continue to produce the content that you're doing. And I think that's also something that's overlooked, because when someone reaches out to you and says, hey man, I would love to be a guest on your show, I would just look back at your criteria, your box. Does this person fit in? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But that's something that I think is something that is good to bring up and discuss, at least just because it's probably something that many of you have dealt with. The best place to find guests. Okay, so now we've talked about what your story is about, what your podcast is about, who your audience is, and we have the right kind of guests. Where do we find these people? Where are they? And how have things changed since the coronavirus? A lot, actually, right? So I think I'll start with Twitter and Instagram. For me, the best place to find people to be on your show is Twitter and Instagram. You can really learn, about their profiles. What are they posting? Are you comfortable with that? Are you comfortable with the person that you're sharing your network with, you're sharing your brand with? Because I know you care about your brand a lot. So doing a little vetting, seeing where they've been, and even looking as deep as to followers, which I'll be the first to say, followers are not the end-all be-all when it comes to someone being qualified for a guest. But if they're active on social media, if you see that they're sharing stuff, I'll go back to Taquan Marshall, who has become a good friend of mine now, is he shares, and every time I tag him something, whether it's a show or something related to the podcast, always reshares. And I think that goes a long way. That's another group of people who are open to your show, can listen to your show, can watch your show, and everything like that. So I think finding people, Twitter and Instagram are the leading candidates, and they're great people. They're great ways to locate them. Now, actually booking them and having them come on your show is a little bit of a different story. For me, out of the three, I would lean towards LinkedIn. It's specialized in networking connections, right? So having people that you don't know, or maybe you have a mutual connection in, is great. You're able to and then you can really see their resume, their virtual resume right in front of you, and really get a feel for what they do. Now, really the best way, and this is, I think the previous speaker spoke about this too, but use your network. You would be surprised about who knows who and where to get started. It can seem daunting to people to say, man, like, I want to have these sorts of people, but a lot of people aren't responding, and LinkedIn has worked a little bit, but stay with it. It's going to work. You just got to, you got to be consistent. I think that's one thing that's often overlooked, is being consistent with your show is extremely important as far as posting, the type of guests that you're having. Does it fit the parameters of your show? Are you still, reaching out to the same types of people for your podcast? So I think Twitter and Instagram, and I've reached out to people on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and the most success I've had between the three is with LinkedIn. The best is with email, if you're able to track down that email and find that person's email. But be creative. I think right now more than ever, be creative. Find a way to reach someone with a engaging message or email that's not going to be read like any other email. It's going to reel them in and want to be a part of your show. The last thing, or one of the last things I want to talk about, is the waiting game. Now, this goes into the social media side and getting people to come on your show, but there will be times where you will not hear a response. Be prepared to reach out to multiple people, and lastly, be patient and have a backup plan. This should go for everything, right? So what I mean by this is, my first example, when you first start a show, my first piece of advice is to have at least 5 or 6 episodes in the can before you start releasing. Now, why this could be important is anything can happen when producing your show, especially if it's weekly. That's 52 episodes a year. You can definitely do it. I believe in you. I know you can do it. But being prepared at the beginning is extremely important, and you want to be able to be consistent in your posting. Because if you're posting, for 3 weeks and you're a weekly show and then you miss, it's going to be hard to get people to jump back on. So being consistent with your posting, and what I mean with having a backup plan is when you don't put all your eggs in a basket for getting that one guest that you want. I'm sure you're going to get them most of the time, but sometimes people don't read their email, people respond later, and things just happen. Maybe, they just weren't able to make it, or, it was just a no. So you do need those backup plans. And for me, I think it's still on my calendar where I have a set time every week to look. But since I'm always thinking about the podcast and, the Nick Rodriguez podcast and how to improve and how to be better in every phase and really stick to my criteria of what is this show really all about, it's always on my mind. So whenever I'm on Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram or even Facebook and I see somebody that's intriguing, wow, I'm going to hit the follow. I'm going to do what I can to be creative to get that person to be on the show. I know it can be frustrating sometimes when you try to get someone on the show and you're like, man, that person would have been amazing. But there are so many people that I've learned, meeting John Largent, meeting so many of these other people that, you might not have known. And now you're opened up to so many different people. So be open to many things and have fun. I think some of the speakers before were saying that, just have fun with it. And I think, it's enjoyable. You'll learn a lot out of it. And, as I mentioned at the top, I'm just under a year of producing content for the Nick Rodriguez podcast. And it's been a lot of fun to do it. And I've learned a lot along the way and met some fantastic people, but keep pushing. The 1 year mark is, from what I've heard, is a big mark to hit. And I'm excited to be here. And that brings me to my last slide. So final thoughts, you can follow the Nick Rodriguez podcast on Twitter at NRodPod, YouTube, the Nick Rodriguez podcast, and Instagram at Nick Rodriguez podcast. The last thing that I'll say here is we are talking about we just launched the roundtable with the Nick Rodriguez podcast, which will be a Zoom call with 3 other individuals, 4 including myself, where we will talk about topical issues going on in the world that mean close to that person. So I encourage you to check it out. The first one we did the recording for last week, and the recording will be available on YouTube and Spotify, available on August 19th. But it was so great to speak to you guys today, and I hope you got just a little bit of knowledge. I think for me, before I started podcasting, I took from everybody. I nibbled a little bit here as far as the intro. I like that segment that they did, and I like interacting, with your listeners. So I think if you take a little bit from each person, you build your own, you really figure out what your show is about, you'll be all set. Thank you.
Nick, that was amazing. Thank you so much for your presentation. I have a few questions for you, if that's okay, before you leave us here. First of all, I have a comment. I have been lucky enough to have been a guest on your show, and I will say this, that you do something that not enough people in podcasting do that really sets you up for success, is you really have a very regimented and structured methodology for your guests. You have a Google form that you send out that you ask for specific questions. You make sure that we have the right equipment so that when we talk, it's actually something that is, you can hear us and we can hear you, and that the communication is at the highest level. And your emails, your follow-up emails are amazing, because you actually share the links to where people can listen to the episode. And I think that's something that so many people drop the ball on, that they think once they've recorded and maybe once they've edited and put it out there, it's done. And that's really only half of it, because you want to make sure that people know how your guests, and you've had some really high caliber guests, they're not going to spend a whole lot of time finding the link and doing the work. But if you provide it for them, they'll copy and paste it and push it out on their social media.
Absolutely. I think that is overlooked sometimes too. And I think if I was a guest in that scenario, I kind of look at it and be like, it's your show. Especially if you're having a lot of high profile people on your show, like they're getting interviewed all the time, so they don't always have the time and to go on Instagram and tag you and everything like that. And for me, that's something that I want to do. And I always provide the episode link in text if I had it, if I have their phone number or something like that, but also on Instagram and Twitter, just to get them involved and share their expertise and story.
Yeah, I had someone ask, because of the photo that you showed, was that done at your studio, or was that done at another studio where you did the interview?
Yeah, so that with Taquan Marshall, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes. So that was a previous studio in Alpharetta. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, but due to COVID-19 and everything like that, I've moved to doing all the interviews at home, which has been a different experience, but it's been great. It's just a little bit different, but that was at a previous studio back in 2019, I believe.
Yeah, and one of the other things I want to personally ask you is, you have made such an impact. I have seen your growth, and I see people talking about your podcast, and you've really started this from scratch, and you do have the educational background for communications and things. Where do you see the show going in the next 3 years? Do you see this as something that you can build into a multi-purpose brand, where you've got your own studio and you've got your own sports desk, and where do you see this going?
Absolutely, John. I think the exciting part about this is really having the opportunity to have your hands on it and be able to create something and mold something. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, the roundtable is something I've seen other people do. It's not a new idea, but I think being able to be a content creator, I think it's limitless. I think the sky is the limit. There's a lot of exciting things coming for the Nick Rodriguez podcast that I can't share quite yet. We're still working on a bunch of things, but I think, we've shown and proven that we are innovative, and we are having a lot of fun with it too.
Well, I'm one of your biggest fans. I think you do a phenomenal job. I think your initiative and your structure and how you conduct yourself, both during the interview and then everything else you do, you're doing everything right. I know you're going to be one of the biggest sports podcasts in the business in just a matter of time. I mean, heck, you're 25 years old. You got plenty of time, but I know that you really strive for that excellence, and I've seen your, I can say this from a perspective of being someone that's kind of seen your evolution just in the
Yep.
short time. Your interviews are getting better. Your content is getting better. Your presentation, your confidence, everything I see you doing is getting better. And I mean, and that's that's incremental. That's good. There's a book out there I read called From Good to Great, and that's where you are. You're in that space between good, because you started from scratch, to really breaking out and being a standout in this space. And so I could not wish you more luck. You're an awesome young man, and I really appreciate you participating on the Sports PodCon, and hopefully with everybody watching and being on the session here, we'll continue to drive to get that Guinness Book of World Records. So man, you're a part of
Yes.
history.
Thank you so much, John, for all the kind words. And yes, let's push for the world record, of course.
Absolutely. Well, I think at this point we're going to let you go. I'm going to have our moderator, June Han, join us back here for the last couple of minutes before we end Sports PodCon. I want to thank all of our guests. I want to thank Kelly Palace and Maria Parker. I want to thank Chris Dial and Mary Ullman Jaffet. And of course, I want to thank the great and powerful Nick Rodriguez. And we really appreciate your participation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John, for the opportunity.
Thank you. All right, June. Any wrap-up thoughts? You've been monitoring from your secret lair in the greater San Diego area.
Yeah, no, that was amazing. Like that was, John, that was a great lineup. And so I encourage everyone to let folks know about, what they heard today, maybe a specific session, so folks can search for it in the recordings. We are very close to the world record, by the way. So so close I don't even know if I'm supposed to say this, but no one's moderating me. So we're going to have someone from the Guinness World Record organization tomorrow give us an update and to hear more specifically. So anyone that's on right now, please come back for that. This was phenomenal. You never let us down, John. I know that, when we back in the bygone era, when we did things in person, this was super fun to see you pull together the community live, and the folks that you lined up today. That was amazing. I mean, that was just, I have so many different things to say about each one of the shows. So that's great. We also have a unique thing after this. I don't know how much the crossover it is, but it's the podcasting community in India. And
Yes.
So we encourage people to stay on as much as if they want to. I know I will. It's pretty great stuff. So
yeah, I'm going to be joining as well. I think the great takeaway from the Podfest Global Summit is that it is global, and so we're going to have a different perspective from podcasters in India, and I can't wait to be a part of that, because we are a global community. And I want to say this to you, June. You made this process for me extremely easy. I'm not the sharpest knife in the tool shed, so you made it.
But you're the
so
prettiest,
easy to,
John. But you're the
Oh,
prettiest.
yeah.
Come on, man.
And hey, I'm gonna do a quick shout out for Awesome Guests. You need to go check out awesomeguest.com, and that's June's company. And I have used them. They're phenomenal. And to the point that Nick just had on his last session, that if you need assistance finding those really appropriate guests for your podcast, talk to June. He's awesome, and his company's amazing, and they make it easy for you as well. So I'm going to give you a
Awesome.
shout out
Thank
for
you,
that.
sir. Thank you. All right. So we're going to go ahead and end this. John, congratulations. That was a great mini con.
Thank you. You were awesome. I really appreciate it. It's great to see you and hear your voice again, buddy.
All right. So we are going to bring Andrew back in. We're going to stop the recording here.